This conversation about education, it really got me thinking. Father and daughter diving into, well, the very essence of learning, it's a dynamic we can all relate to, right?
It's a timeless debate brought to life. And what captivates me is how this text goes beyond the immediate family dynamic. I mean, it seamlessly brings in centuries of Jewish tradition, weaving in figures like, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the giants of Western thought.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to our own assumptions about education. And we meet Rotem, this incredibly sharp young girl who's not afraid to ask the tough questions. Imagine this, you're rushing out the door, late for work, and your kid stops you dead in your tracks to ponder the purpose of school.
And what's fascinating is it's not just some theoretical exercise for her dad's job. It's literally on the line. It creates this underlying tension, right, between her playful curiosity and the weight of these questions, a dynamic that's echoed throughout history when you think about it.
Absolutely. So where do they turn to find these answers? The Hebrew Bible, of course, diving deep into the Tanakh, tracing the roots of education and Jewish tradition. The thing that struck me right away, this idea of the Torah as a blueprint, like an architect's plan. But here's the kicker. It predates creation itself.
It reframes how you think about the text. It's not just a history, it's a guidebook existing before existence itself.
Exactly. And this guidebook, it stresses action, engagement. There are passages in Proverbs, Deuteronomy, urging us to go beyond surface level, really grapple with the material, wrestle with it, make it relevant to our lives.
Making knowledge practical, applicable. You see, memorization alone, it's not enough. It's about understanding. Embodiment.
Yes. And, throughout these ancient texts, we see these glimmers of this enduring debate, faith versus reason.
A timeless struggle. It transcends the boundaries of any one text, any one time period, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. And, it's worth pointing out the text never actually names the specific text Rotem and her dad are exploring. It adds to the timelessness of it all, don't you think?
It does. Like, we're privy to this conversation that could be happening anywhere, any when.
It speaks to the universality of these questions about education, our place in the world across cultures, generations.
Precisely. And it's that very universality that makes exploring these texts so enriching, so thought-provoking, even today. They offer a lens to examine our own assumptions about learning, about knowledge, about the nature of truth itself.
It's amazing how these connections start to emerge, right? You see this theme of engagement, of questioning assumptions, and it immediately calls to mind figures like, Socrates.
Going all the way back to ancient Greece.
Right. Roaming the streets of Athens, essentially prodding people into deeper thought, just like Rotem.
He believed true understanding, it couldn't be passive, you had to wrestle with it. Draw it out through dialogue, through questioning everything. Not about giving answers, but igniting that spark of inquiry. Even challenging, deeply held beliefs in the process.
And then there's Plato, right, his student. The allegory of the cave, it's such a powerful image, especially when we think about Rotem in that dimly lit room.
It's a striking parallel, isn't it? Those prisoners, chained in the cave, their only reality, these shadows on the wall.
Believing those shadows are the truth, totally unaware of what exists beyond their limited view.
And for Plato, education, that was the key. Breaking free from those chains. Stepping out of the cave into the light of true knowledge.
So education as this journey from darkness to light, from limited perspective to a more complete understanding.
Precisely.
It makes you consider how our own caves might be shaped by our experiences, our backgrounds, all of it.
Absolutely. And then you have Aristotle, another student, this time of Plato. And he offers a slightly different perspective, doesn't he? Where Plato focused on the abstract, those forms, Aristotle, he brings it back to the empirical world. Observation, reason, these are the paths to knowledge.
Which ties into that theme we see with Rotem, finding the right way to live. Knowledge isn't just these abstract concepts floating around, it's about living a good life, a meaningful life.
And this is where Rotem's observation about only encountering a handful of thinkers across centuries, it really resonates. She stumbles on something crucial, that our understanding of history, it's often limited to the voices that were amplified.
Right. What are we missing? It's a bit humbling, honestly, that even our pursuit of knowledge, it's shaped by forces outside our control.
It highlights the importance of approaching history with open eyes. Recognizing our understanding of the past, it's constantly evolving as we uncover new perspectives. It's a process of discovery.
Always piecing together a puzzle, never quite sure we have all the pieces, but the search itself, the pursuit, that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
It does, and it takes us from ancient Greece to the medieval period. A time when faith and reason, they were often at odds.
Yet we still see these brilliant minds grappling with the same questions. Take Maimonides, for example, Rambam, a giant in Jewish thought. His work trying to reconcile faith and reason, especially his book, Guide for the Perplexed, it still speaks to people today.
He refused to see them as inherently opposed, faith and reason. He argued that reason, when used correctly, it could lead to an even deeper understanding of God, of Scripture.
It's this idea that true knowledge, it requires both, our intellect and our faith. They're not contradictory, but complementary.
Working in harmony.
And speaking of engaging narratives, the text mentions the Kuzari, a story that really captivated me.
The Kuzari, a masterpiece, really. Jewish philosophy presented as a dialogue. You have the king of the Khazars, and he's on this quest to find the true faith.
He speaks with a philosopher, a Christian, even a Muslim theologian. But ultimately, it's the rabbi who provides the most compelling answers.
And this is what the text wants us to see. The power of storytelling to make these complex ideas accessible.
The ancient world seemed to know that sometimes the best way to grapple with challenging concepts, it's through narrative, human experience.
The Kuzari, with its dialogue, its exploration of different viewpoints, it embodies this intellectual curiosity, this open-mindedness that we've been talking about.
It paves the way for us to move into the Renaissance, a period of incredible intellectual awakening. It's incredible when you think about it, this major shift in thinking during the Renaissance. You go from centuries where faith really dominated intellectual life to this rediscovery of critical inquiry.
The Renaissance was a time of incredible growth. Art, literature, science, fueled by this rediscovery of classical learning and, a willingness to challenge what came before.
It's like everything was ripe for a change.
Exactly. And that's where humanism comes in. This wasn't just about tweaking the edges. It was a fundamental shift in how we learn, how we understand the world.
A complete 180 from the rigid scholasticism of the Middle Ages.
Right. Instead of rote memorization of scripture, the focus shifted to the human experience, exploring the world, ourselves, in all its complexity.
It wasn't about just absorbing knowledge, but actively engaging with it, using it to become a more well-rounded person. And that really resonated with me.
And this emphasis on independent thought, it's a thread that runs throughout history, wouldn't you say? It pops up again with John Milton and his criticism of rote learning.
He believed it stifled true understanding. I'm with him on that one. Anyone who's ever sat through a boring lecture or struggled through a dry textbook, you get it. Just memorizing facts and figures doesn't equal understanding.
It's about critical thinking, encouraging students to question, analyze, and ultimately form their own conclusions.
Become active participants in their own education, not just passive vessels for information. And that leads us to arguably one of the most revolutionary ideas at the time, John Locke's concept of tabula rasa, the blank slate.
Radical, right. The idea that we're not born with innate knowledge, but shaped by our experiences. It completely flipped the script on centuries of thought.
Education then becomes this incredibly powerful tool, not just for transmitting knowledge, but for shaping who we become as individuals.
Unlocking potential that might otherwise remain hidden. But while Locke emphasized experience, his contemporary, René Descartes, he was wrestling with something else entirely, the limits of our senses, the very foundation of experience.
Descartes, the "I think, therefore I am" guy, it's a phrase that's echoed through the ages, and for good reason.
Because he dared to question everything, even our senses, which, let's face it, can be deceiving. And yet, even with that doubt, he arrived at that one unshakable truth.
The act of thinking, of doubting, proved his existence. It's a powerful realization, and it's fascinating how it ties back to Rotem and her friend, debating whether a dog's existence depends on its ability to contemplate it.
It's like even children, without realizing it, are grappling with these big philosophical questions. It makes you think. If thinking equals existing, what does that mean for beings that might not have the same self-awareness as humans?
It's a question that's still relevant today in fields like animal cognition, even artificial intelligence.
And that's the beauty of this text and this deep dive. It weaves together these threads from across time and cultures. Ancient Jewish tradition, Greek philosophy, Renaissance humanism. It highlights how these big questions, they continue to resonate.
The quest for knowledge, it's an ongoing journey. And as we've seen, it's a journey that often leads to more questions than answers. But it's in those questions that we truly grow, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. It's about embracing that uncertainty, that constant pursuit of understanding. It's what makes us human.
So to our listeners, we encourage you, don't let this be the end. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking your own understanding of what it means to learn, to grow, and to really grapple with knowledge itself.